Ivy's not here. I want to thank Mr. Ivy for assisting in this. We'll go to amendments on the roster. Amendment 5, Mr. Swazi. Hearing none, it's now in order to consider Amendment 5 to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Swazi on the roster. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8631, offered by Mr. Swazi. At the end of the following report, not later than 180 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary of Homeland Security shall submit to the Committee on Homeland Security.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank Mr. Jimenez for this bill. This is a great idea to do this. We have to stop any sort of products coming out of the Xinjiang region where so many people are being abused, the Uyghur people are being abused. We have to stop the Chinese from having access to our technology with the malware, as you pointed out, as a possible thing that they're doing. And we need to prod the U.S. industry to expand domestic production of batteries. So I want to thank you so much for introducing this bill. It's a great idea. My amendment would add a requirement that the Secretary of Homeland Security be required to submit a report within 180 days, 6 months, which is long before your bill would take place, on the anticipated impacts to DHS's mission and the costs associated with carrying out this bill. The report must include information on the mission and cost impacts to CBP, including the Border Patrol, ICE, including Homeland Security investigations, the Secret Service, TSA, the Coast Guard, FEMA, and other key components within DHS. When it comes to ensuring that DHS purchases support our national security and economic advantage, Democrats and Republicans agree. This is something that we must be doing. So while, again, very much like the concept of Mr. Jimenez's bill, what's missing from the bill is what concerns me, and I'm just suggesting this one addition. We need to have the DHS do a report on how this prohibition of Chinese-made batteries will impact the DHS budget and its mission. Is the DHS currently purchasing batteries that would be banned by the bill? If so, what's it using them for? Do those batteries, in fact, pose a threat? For example, malware from the Xinjiang region, the different things that Mr. Jimenez enumerated. Can the DHS source a sufficient number of batteries from other suppliers if needed? What's the cost difference between a battery made in China and a battery made in the US or by an allied nation? How will DHS fund such a cost difference? How could this bill impact planned DHS initiatives? We don't know the answer to these questions. So my amendment would help DHS to figure out these things before the prohibition actually goes into effect. That gives us here in Congress a chance to help DHS transition to these non-Chinese made batteries, which we all seek that objective, by addressing any unanticipated negative impacts. For example, we could use the report to figure out where they could get the funds to pay for higher cost batteries if necessary. Or we could give the DHS flexibility, and I know your waiver does that also in many ways, to exempt certain agencies if critical operations are going to be impacted. And I know the last thing that anybody on this committee wants to do is to have an unfunded mandate that we can't actually implement. So I urge my colleagues to add this amendment to the bill. With that, I thank the chair and yield back.
Gentleman yields. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Mr. Jimenez, you are recognized.
I do not support the amendment to the amendment. We've already asked TSA and DHS to give us a report outlining any issues they may have or any impact that my legislation would create for them.
Mr. Chairman, could I find out where we could see a copy of that so we can read that?
So the question would be, would the gentleman yield? And the answer is yes. So go ahead, Mr. Swazi.
Committee staff is engaged with DHS on this issue, and you can see whatever they're producing. Yes.
Yes. If you have some sort of report or something like that they gave.
We're waiting for the report to come back. So we've asked for this information, and we're waiting for that to come back. And we'll be happy to share that information with you.
Yeah, so should we wait until we get the report before we vote on this, or should we just add my amendment, which you're getting a report like this anyway, so that my amendment would just require that they do what you're asking for already, and that way we'll be required that they give us that report before it actually becomes enacted.
Let's start the clock on this, and I will allow Mr. Jimenez, the time is it's yielded to you. You're asking him, so you're yielding back for him to answer. Go ahead, Mr. Jimenez.
I think we just need to move forward with this legislation, to be honest with you. You're asking for something we already asked for, but we need to move forward with this legislation. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I recognize Mr. Luttrell for 5 minutes.
Does committee staff have a timeline on when that report is due, like a hard date by chance?
Stand by.
Is it inside the 180 days that Mr. Swazi is asking for, or is it post 180?
The gentleman yields to Mr. Jimenez.
The reports from staff is that we'll get it back before the 180 days.
The gentleman yields to Mr. Swazi.
Will the gentleman yield? Yes. Yeah. I'm just requesting that we do an amendment that requires the DHS to give the report that you guys are waiting for so that we can actually have this information before the bill is actually implemented. That's, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. We're kind of saying the same thing. It's not, I don't even know that this is worth fighting for. I'm asking for a report that answers the exact questions that you've asked for. That's all.
So
The time is Mr. Luttrell's.
So in my opinion, this makes sense to me because as hard as it is for us to get reports back from DHS, that puts a hard date on it.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Does anyone else want to speak on the amendment? Ms. Greene, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should move forward on a vote on this. I can't imagine anyone on this committee being pro-China or for their battery companies. I think this is a good piece of legislation. Prohibits the Department of Defense from procuring batteries from 6 major companies owned and operated in the People's Republic of China, including Contemporary Amperex Technology Company and Goshen High Tech. I think the bill prohibits the use of DHS funds for purchasing battery technology produced by PRC-aligned Chinese companies. This bill includes waivers if the batteries procured do not pose a national security data or infrastructure risk to the United States, among other requirements. I think the American people have been clear, and we've seen it time and time again. We can't trust China, and China is dominating the world's battery production. And I think this is important for us to move forward. I don't see why we need to.
Point of clarification, though, just if I could, if the gentlelady would yield, we're on the amendment on the report, not on the bill.
Right. I just want to say I think this is such an important national security issue. We can move forward and vote on this. I agree with Mr. Jimenez.
Will the gentlelady yield?
I'm going to recognize myself for just a second. If we put this into this amendment, so we accept Mr. Swazi's amendment, this report demand doesn't begin until this bill becomes law, meaning we have to schedule the floor, we have to pass it on the floor, we have to then send it to the Senate, they have to hear it in committee, then it has to go to the Senate and get passed to the Senate, and assuming it doesn't get amended and have to go to conference and come back to here, we have a request for them, actually a somewhat of a demand, that they get this information to us. I think this is superfluous, personally. So I'll be against the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and I yield. Mr. Swazi, I think you've been recognized already, so what you'll need to, Mr. Magaziner, you're recognized, and I'm assuming you're yielding to Mr. Swazi.
I will in a second. I'll just say, I mean, this is one of those things where I think people look at us and kind of wonder what's going on here. I mean, it's a very reasonable amendment asking for this information. It in no way would slow down the implementation of the bill should it be passed, and I want to highlight that, as Mr. Swazi said. And if what we're saying is, you know, we already asked for some of the information, so we don't need to ask for it again, well, I appreciate that our colleagues across the aisle are expressing so much confidence in the DHS leadership, and I agree with that. But why not put a deadline on it, right? So what are we even doing here? And with that, Mr. Swazi, if you'd like me to yield, I'm happy.
Mr. Swazi is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. You know, I don't disagree with anything, and this is it's hard for me to say, but that Congresswoman Greene said, and I don't disagree with anything Mr. Jimenez said, and I don't disagree with anything the chairman has said. This bill, under the current construction, is not implemented until 2027. So all the talk about the delay, it doesn't take effect until 2027. I'm just asking that the DHS give us a report as the impacts of how this will be implemented. Mr. Jimenez is a former mayor of a major county in the United States of America, larger than most states. He knows what it's like to run a big, complex agency. Getting a report like this written will just help with the implementation of it. I don't need to debate it any further. I don't see why we're arguing about this. It's a pretty straightforward thing, an easy way to get us on your team. So I don't need to debate it any further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields, Mr. Magaziner. The time is still yours.
I'll yield.
The gentleman yields. I recognize Mr. Swalwell for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I appreciate the chairman's intent here. I have recently successfully put language into the FAA reauthorization, which essentially bans any of our airports using their funds, federal funds, for their transportation or infrastructure projects that would be sourced from China. I've written legislation that's bipartisan with Mr. Reschenthaler that creates a production tax credit in the area of critical minerals so that we can compete and counter China's illegal practices in this area. I support the amendment here because knowing law enforcement's concerns about this, I want to make sure we understand the impact. And we see this locally in the drone space, Mr. Chairman, where, again, because we're behind on drone manufacturing and the materials needed for drones, our law enforcement still have search and rescue and SWAT needs, and so they've procured drones that, unfortunately, the cheapest and only place to find it comes from China. And they would love more than anything to support American-made manufacturers if that was affordable. And so in the NDAA, they are facing a similar challenge there with some legislation that's going to make it hard for them to do their job. And so I think what Mr. Swazi is asking is let's just understand the impact here before, and especially with kind of a 3-year lead before implementation, to make sure that our first responders and those who rely on this technology know what's going to happen. I would also like to just indulge the chairman to enter into the record a letter from the California fire chiefs, and it's actually not in regard to this legislation, but it's a June 11 letter from the California Fire Chiefs Association regarding the NDAA and the Countering Drones Act there. And it raises essentially the same concerns that I raised that we've seen from first responders. So again, I appreciate the intent here. We should do everything we can to counter China, but we just want to understand as we do that, does that limit us and put us in a worse position as we try and keep the borders secure, as we try and keep the homeland secure? And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Anyone else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Higgins, you are recognized.
I appreciate
On
the
the amendment to the amendment.
amendment to the amendment and the rest of the amendments to the amendment. I'm going to oppose them all. It appeared to be a coordinated effort to obstruct the intent of the underlying bill, which is a well-written bill mandating that the Department of Homeland Security not use money that's appropriated through Congress to buy batteries produced by companies controlled by Communist Chinese Party-run entities. I mean, may I ask my friend and colleague, Mr. Swazi, do you intend, if your amendment fails, do you intend to support the underlying bill or not?
The gentleman yields to Mr. Swazi. You're recognized.
Yeah, it's probably I won't support it.
There you go.
I'll have to think about it, but I just want to make it very clear, Mr.
So
Higgins.
reclaiming my time.
Let me just, the
I'm
gentleman
just
yields, so I can just
saying-
take a comment on what you're saying, Mr. Higgins?
Well, I believe it's
Mr.
my
Higgins,
time.
I don't think
It
I can
is,
prove
it
my...
is your time. It is Mr. Higgins'
my time.
I didn't yield back. You yielded to me.
He can reclaim if it's his time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my time, and I'm just saying, I'm just saying, my brother, you always give a straight answer. You gave a straight answer just now. I appreciate that. What I'm saying is all these amendments are structured to delay, require a report, contingent upon the
Will the gentleman
certification
yield?
of the secretary.
Will the gentleman yield?
List maintained, in a
Will the
moment.
gentleman yield?
List maintained by the Department of Homeland, a list. Nothing in the bill can be construed to prohibit the procurement of electric vehicles. Strategy for procuring batteries. Amendment after amendment after amendment after amendment designed to delay the Congress taking action to stop DHS from using federal money to buy Chinese communist batteries. Can we not just agree that we shouldn't be buying communist Chinese batteries? And I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Does anyone else wish to speak? You're recognized.
I yield.
Gentlelady yields to Mr. Swazi.
Yeah, I really shouldn't, thank you, thank the gentlelady. I shouldn't have to do this to prove my bona fides. I'm the founder and the chair of the Uyghur Caucus, has tried to expose the abuses of the Chinese Communist Party to America and the world as to what they're doing in their forced labor camps. I was appointed by the Speaker as a member of the Executive Commission on China and have been trying to expose the nefarious actions by the Chinese Communist Party, not only in Xinjiang, but in Tibet, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan. I'm the first member of the Democratic Party that came out publicly to say that I would support Speaker Johnson in his role as Speaker if he put the bill on the floor to support the Indo-Pacific, because it's such an important part of our strategy that we have to face here. I don't have to prove my bona fides here. The bottom line is we should not be buying Chinese Communist Party batteries. You're absolutely right about that, Mr. Higgins. Nothing in this amendment that I have proposed will delay the implementation of Mr. Jimenez's thoughtful bill in any way whatsoever. The enaction of this bill is for 2027. I'm simply asking that there be a requirement that the DHS prepare a report that talks about what the impacts of this bill will be, so that, like the California fire departments that Mr. Swalwell mentioned, and the Department of Defense has said when seeking a waiver from the Department of Defense regarding batteries for the Department of Defense, said, listen, let's just see how this is going to impact our operations so that we can implement it in a certain way. We've got to get exactly to where Mr. Jimenez is saying. We should not be buying batteries from the Chinese Communist Party or any companies like that. You're right about that. But let's not screw up our law enforcement process our procedures in the process. Let's have a thoughtful way of doing it. And let's do it together as a team, Democrats and Republicans. It's a simple, straightforward request that does not delay the building in any way, does not hurt the mission that Mr. Jimenez has laid out in his bill whatsoever. And if we had just gotten this report that Mr. Jimenez referenced earlier that we have not gotten yet already, we probably wouldn't even be in this situation. The report that you said, we've asked them for it, but we haven't gotten it yet. If we had that report already, we wouldn't even be in this situation. So I yield back. Thank you very much.
Ms. Ramirez?
And I yield. I yield.
Gentlelady yields.
I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Magazine.
You're out of time, so someone else would need to.
No, sorry.
Mr. Carter, you're recognized.
I yield.
The gentleman yields to Mr. Magaziner.
No, I would just suggest that this is a good faith effort by Mr. Swazi at bipartisanship here. And as I've listened to this debate, I have not heard a single argument for why this would not be useful information for us to have and the public to have. I have not heard an argument for how this would delay or obstruct the implementation of the bill. And so, you know, in a Congress that has gained the reputation for being hyper-partisan, this is an opportunity for my friends across the aisle to show that you don't have to be hyper-partisan. You can agree to a bipartisan amendment that is reasonable, that enhances the bill and does not undermine it. And, you know, let's show the public that we're capable of working together on the most basic things. And so I applaud Mr. Swazi at his attempt to introduce a reasonable bipartisan amendment. And, you know, I hope that my friends across the aisle will see this as an opportunity in that vein. And I'll yield back to Mr. Carter.
Gentleman yields.
I yield.
The gentleman, Mr. Carter yields. Would anyone else care to make a comment? Mr. Kennedy, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go on record supporting this amendment to the amendment presented by Mr. Swazi. This is a common sense approach to creating a piece of legislation and making it better. And to me, this is just a simple way to get more information, and create an opportunity for us to work together to make this bill one that I believe we can all rally around. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. The ranking member is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me go on record for the Democrats on the committee that Mr. Swazi's amendment does nothing for the timeline of the bill. It is just information that this committee could benefit from if it had it. That's not required by the current piece of legislation. So if anything, it strengthens the overall piece of legislation. I yield to the gentleman from, the rest of the time, gentleman from New York.
I just want to ask,
Gentleman yields, Mr. Swazi.
just ask a simple question, Mr. Chairman. Maybe Mr. Jimenez has the answer. Who does the Department of Homeland Security buy batteries from now?
I'm sure they buy batteries from all over the place, and I'm sure they're buying Chinese
Do we know who they buy batteries from?
This prohibits them from buying it from the Communist Chinese
Do
Party.
we know if they do buy
This
batteries?
prohibits them from buying them from
Do
the
we know
people
if they
that
buy
you
batteries
say-
from them now?
This prohibits them from buying them
So
from
no-
the people that you say.
So nobody
are-
knows.
Hold on. I got the floor. No back and forth here. Let's recognize when you're recognized, that's when you speak. And I think Mr. Jimenez was answering the question. Mr. Swazi, and you yield back, and Mr. Swazi, the time is yours right now. Or actually, it's Mr. Thompson's, but you're recognized.
I just want to ask a very simple question, which I think highlights the common sense approach of this bill. Who does the Department of Homeland Security buy batteries from now? I think Mr. Jimenez said they probably buy them from a lot of people. Okay, it would be good to know, are they buying batteries from?
Would the gentleman
Does
yield?
does Yemen?
I mean, would the gentleman,
Yes.
the gentleman's
Yes.
yielded to me.
Okay.
So if the report came back that they were buying them from China, and we don't want them to buy from China, and we pass a bill that says you can't buy from China, what difference does the report make?
We need to know which companies they're buying them from. Are they from the Xinjiang region? Are they batteries that are being used with malware, as Mr. Jimenez pointed out? Are they batteries that we can't, say they're being used for some piece of technology right now that is essential to the law enforcement mission of DHS. And if we didn't have those batteries available until they get replaced by a U.S. domestic manufacturer or by one of our allies, we don't want to shut down our law enforcement operations. Let's just get a report.
You reclaiming it? Mr. Thompson's reclaiming his time.
The bill, one of the amendments is intended to fix even that problem, Mr. Swazi. The bill says you can't buy from certain companies. It doesn't say you can't buy from Chinese companies like that. So I'm trying, one of the things we're trying to do is fix the bill so we accomplish exactly what we want to do. It lists 6 companies that you can't buy from, but we don't know if those 6 companies are presently being acquired batteries by DHS because we don't have any information. You're trying to get the information with your report, but even when we had it, another amendment we will discuss shortly will say, don't just limit it to these companies you listed in the bill. Let's stop everybody. So there's a way we can strengthen the bill, so if it's all the Chinese companies, we'll do that. But your bill does not say all the Chinese companies. And that's to come a little later with some other amendments. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Strong, who's yielding to Mr. Jimenez.
This bill is a preemptive bill. It forbids us buying batteries from those companies, those PRC companies. So, the question of where they're buying their batteries now, I would assume they're buying batteries from, there's no prohibition of where they buy their batteries from. This prohibits them from buying them from these companies. So, yeah.
Would the gentleman yield? I understand this bill was patterned after a Department of Defense bill that was in the NDAA.
Exactly, and it's
Is it correct then that the DOD had certified that these companies were suspicious and therefore they, as the Department of Defense, were not going to buy from these 6 companies?
This bill passed unanimously in the NDAA, bipartisan bill, just almost exactly the same bill.
So it's my understanding then that the Department of Defense has said these 6 companies are bad and therefore we shouldn't buy for the Department of Defense. And what you've done is taken that information and applied it to DHS. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
Mr.
I just
Chairman,
wanted to make sure I
I
understood.
just
So
yield-
these 6 companies have been ruled by the Department of Defense as suspicious and maybe they hadn't found it, but they suspect that they could because of their associations and therefore the Department of Defense said, we're not buying those. And it passed unanimously, 100% Republican, 100% Democrat, right? And then you said, well, we'll do that for Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, but-
That's
Okay.
correct.
Mr.
Hold on. I yield to Mr. Jimenez.
Yes, this is patterned after the NDAA. It's law right now. And that's all it is, and it's preemptive.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jimenez, may I?
Does the gentleman yield?
Well, I just find it curious, though, that, I will in a second. I find it curious, though, that after saying how much you care about the Uyghurs, and that this specifically targets a company that's using Uyghur slave labor to produce the batteries, that when my colleague, Mr. Higgins, asked you if you're going to vote for the underlying bill, you said no. I just found that really interesting.
Will the gentleman yield?
Gentleman
Yes, I will.
yields.
Under the Forced Labor Prevention Act, they should be prohibited already. We don't need this bill. That company should be prohibited. If there are batteries being produced in the Xinjiang region, they should be prohibited under existing law. We don't need to pass another law for that particular company. However, as Mr. Thompson pointed out, this is limited to 6 companies. There could be other companies as well that we should be looking at. In addition, under the Department of Defense bill, that was passed, there was a blanket waiver. The bill provided for a blanket waiver for them not to follow the law because they didn't want it to impact our war-fighting capabilities. Same as we wouldn't want to affect our war-fighting capabilities, we wouldn't want it to affect our law enforcement or Homeland Security capabilities.
I'll reclaim my time. We worked with DHS on this, on the waiver, and they're fine with the waiver language that we have drafted.
My staff is telling me that will the gentleman yield?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield for a little while, yeah.
Very
Go ahead.
quickly, my staff is just saying that the DHS requested the full waiver. But again, this is about a 180-day report that will be required to be submitted long before the 2027 implementation of this law. Okay.
Like I said, the DHS.
Gentleman
This
reclaims.
is not a
I
good
reclaim the time. Again, DHS, we provided the waiver language, and DHS is fine with the waiver language that we have in the bill.
The gentleman yields. Does anyone else wish to be recognized on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of the substitute? If there's no further debate, the question is on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of the substitute offered by Mr. Swazi. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment to the amendment in the nature of the
Chairman.
substitute is agreed to.
That's for recorded.
A recorded vote is requested. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, further proceedings on this question are postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment 4 to the amendment in the nature of the substitute offered by Ms. Ramirez on the roster. The clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute